Hey, welcome back to Zombie Tactics. Today, the title of the video, Fast Enough to Die. I'll be clear why that video has been titled that in a second. I want to talk a little bit today about the history of firearms techniques and something we can learn from it if we really want to get home at night and we really want to do the things that are going to keep us alive. Because surprisingly, they might not be some of the things that people firmly, obsessively believe in. It might be something completely different. So let's talk a little bit about the history of firearms technique and where we get these ideas from. One of the first things of interest, and this will be particularly of interest for people that are watching this from other countries, and I've got a small but significant foreign viewership, is that in the United States, a lot of the news media, a majority of it probably, is very much centered around New York City, Washington, D.C., and kind of the eastern seaboard of the United States, and reflects those cultural attitudes and their ideas about life and how life ought to be and how life is. It is a constant complaint among people that are in the Midwest or in the western part of the United States that sometimes the people in New York and Washington, D.C. look at California and other areas, except for large cities and certainly parts of the Midwest, as flyover country. It's like a place that doesn't matter. You know, the real world is New York and Washington, D.C., and everything else is just kind of something we really don't worry about too much. So it's important to understand that culture pervades both the news media, a good part of the publishing industry, as well as military culture, which is very, very focused in some ways, at least at the top ends, the top echelon of things, around life in the D.C. area, that kind of Pentagon kind of beltway area right around in Virginia and D.C. and that kind of thing. It'll be clear why that's important in a second. If we look back at the history of where we get our notions about gunfighting and gunfights and how to prevail, how to win, how to get home alive, because that's what winning means in this case, we'll find that in the history of this, we go back past a certain point and it gets really murky. We don't have any information, partly because weapons were something that was only owned by the military or because the information just plain isn't very good otherwise. One of the areas where we start to get a lot of information about handguns is the Old West and firearms in general. And here's kind of what happened. Publishers on the East Coast, again, New York City, they would send young men out west, young reporters and young journalists and young novelists, with the idea that, like, well, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the West. Go west, young man. You know, write about all the interesting stuff happening out there with the cowboys and the cattle drives and the gold mining and the shootouts and all that. Well, they'd get out here and they'd find out universally that the Old West, in reality, it wasn't the Old West that we think of when we think of movies and TV. The Old West was really boring. It was hard work. It was a hard scrabble existence. It was a lot of just back-breaking work under dirty conditions. You've probably never seen in a movie what an actual Old West town looked like, particularly after a rain when, you know, the streets were like 6 inches deep with horse crap. You've probably never seen that in a movie because that's what the real conditions were like. There weren't really any gunfights. Talk about this a little bit. But these guys got out there and they found out that, like, wow, life in the Old West, well, it wasn't the Old West to them, it was the New West at that time. Life in the West is boring. What are you going to do when you're sent out there by your publisher to go write some interesting stories? Well, you do exactly what a lot of people would do in that condition. You make stuff up. And so a lot of our ideas about what happened in the Old West, particularly having to do with gunfights, is just made up crap. It is as unrealistic and as fantasy and myth rolled up into one as a comic book would be. There is no more reality to one of these Old West pulp novels, which were one of the things that they wrote a lot of, than there is in a Spider-Man comic book. It's that level of difference between the fantasy and the reality. And so, but they sold these novels in large numbers because people back in the, you know, an accountant back in New York City who was looking for something exciting to read, ooh, he just ate this stuff up. And the other thing was that they were written in kind of a pseudo-historical style, so a lot of people adopted them as being truthful, as being real information. Now, when early civilian police departments and the military started to try to codify things like firearms technique, particularly when it had to do with the pistol. Where did they go to get material about what really worked and what really didn't work? Well, the only reports they had available to them were these pulp novels and these other exciting stories, which they didn't realize were utter crap. So you look into early material from these early police organizations, and they are mimicking and copying things in their training regimen and dogma that come right out of the pulp novels of the Old West. Even in the military, you find this happening. A lot of military technique, early military technique, is based upon crap material from pulp novels of the Old West, not based on anything realistic at all. We find this even to the point in time that when the FBI started making training films about handgun technique and how to, they had this kind of thing called the FBI crouch, where what a guy would do is he'd kind of crouch down like this, and he'd slap that gun out like this, and he'd bring it up like this, and he'd shoot, or maybe not even get it all the way out. He'd get it kind of up to like this. And it looks surprisingly similar to that kind of gunfight we see in the Old West, where the two guys square off in the street, and one's got a twitchy gun hand, and the other one's calm, and the other guy's got the steely-eyed stare, and the other one's got an eyebrow raised, and at some point in time, one of them makes his move, and the other guy tries to react to that, and in the spaghetti western sound effect, and one guy's left standing, and the other guy goes, he's shot, and he falls to the ground, and the hero walks away with the girl. Guess what? That never happened. It probably never even happened once. The typical way that somebody would get shot in the Old West, if they were going to get shot, was somebody would walk up onto the street, saw some guy that he had a beef with that he thought was worth killing him over, would walk right up to him, a lot of times behind him, and just pulled a gun out and shot him in the back of the head or the side of the head, or just walked up to him on the street, pulled a gun and shot him. That's how it went down, more often than not. There's not a single case of two guys squaring off in the middle of the street and doing this thing. Never happened. Total fantasy. Now, I started getting familiar with this idea about 30, 40 years ago. I was in high school, and a guy came to the class who was a friend of one of my teachers, one of these little weird life coincidences, and the guy's name was Dave. He kept referring to him as Dave, but it turned out that this guy was David Samuel Peckinpah, Sam Peckinpah. Some of you will know that name. Sam Peckinpah is responsible for almost everything that you see in the movies today that has to do with stylized action movies and violence. All the slow motion explosions, all the slow motion running and action sequences when somebody, gets a gun out and then they get blown back. That all comes from Sam Peckinpah. If you talk to John Milius, John Woo, Michael Mann, Martin Scorsese, all of these people, boom, 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 down to a man, they will all say this all comes from Sam Peckinpah. This is where we get these ideas and this technique. He's the guy that turned that into a whole style of making movies. So when you go out and you see Underworld, even a vampire and werewolf movie or something like that, and you see all that kind of stuff, that comes straight from Sam Peckinpah. And Sam Peckinpah, I didn't know who this guy was. I'm a 17, 18-year-old, mind full of mush in high school. And he was talking about this, and he said, yeah, this is complete crap. I do this stuff for a living. Apparently he'd made a movie called The Wild Ones, or The Wild Bunch is the movie that he'd made that had started this stylized form of violence in the movies. And he goes, I know this. It's just an exciting way to make a movie. But there was never, ever a real gunfight like that in the Old West. It just never happened. And it kind of like, wow, that just kind of opened my eyes a little bit. So even the people that are making these movies, in a lot of cases, they know that's not real. But it's funny how much that gets into our mindset. FBI is teaching quick draw technique. Why is that important? Well, it turns out that a lot of that has to do with the idea of the title of this video, which is being fast enough to die. Because we are obsessed a lot in firearms training circles. Many schools and many people are obsessed with the idea that the thing that's going to get you home alive, the thing that's going to let you win, and winning means you get home alive and or without members of your family being injured, is the idea that somehow you got to be fast on your gun, and we have all these competition shooters that are out there trying to turn in the best time. They want to get that gun out fast, and they want to shoot accurately and quickly as possible. Nothing wrong with any of that. That's something that I think that if you're going to be a responsible firearms owner, you ought to be able to handle that firearm in a fast, efficient, safe manner, getting that gun out fast, getting rounds on target quickly and accurately. That's an important thing. but it isn't the thing we should be obsessed with, because it isn't the thing that gets you home alive. What does get you home alive? One more thing. I've studied a lot of material from like the New York Police Department, SOP 9 data, other police departments, information from Force Science Institute, and they found out an interesting thing, that the guys and gals turning in the best times and the best scores on their yearly or twice a year, whatever it is for your department, qualifications to carry a pistol or a rifle or whatever, the people turning in the best times and the most accurate shooting during qualifications are not the ones that, when it comes right down to it, end up prevailing in a real gunfight. So it's something other than those fast times and those accurate shots that gets you home alive. Just another data point to show into the discussion. Well, what does get you home alive then? Let's take the idea of being fast, a fast draw with our handgun, or fast on target with our gun, and say that that's important, but maybe it's down on the list a little bit below some other things. One of them is your general mindset and awareness of what's going on around you. If your entire focus is that I'm going to stay alive by getting my gun out fast and on target, you're ignoring the fact that you might want to be aware of your situation to begin with. That you might see trouble coming and be able to avoid it. That's one thing. Another thing, and we'll talk about these in future episodes as well because we'll go into greater detail, but another thing that's probably more important than your ability to get that gun out and shoot the guy that's trying to shoot you is just simply the idea of not getting shot yourself in the first place. That puts the equation in favor of the person who's better trained to get his gun out quickly and shoot. If somebody's coming at you and they've already got a gun out, you're behind the curve. There's no amount of fast and accurate that you can do at that point in time that's going to get you, ahead of the game. So things like moving, getting the heck out of the way of his bullets, getting distance, getting cover, getting concealment, anything you can do to not get shot is far more important than getting that gun out fast and getting rounds on target. And anything that you can do to avoid the situation in the first place is more important than your getting, distance and concealment and cover. Oh, I'm in a situation, I see some guy who I know is a violent SOB and he's threatened to shoot me. Maybe I better be someplace else, okay? Much more important at that point in time than your ability to get that gun out fast. Now, if it comes down to it, that's a great skill to have. But in the grand scheme of things, staying alive means a heck of a lot more than being fast enough to die. So we need to take a look at those other things as well, and we'll be doing so in future episodes of Zombie Tactics. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.